Good morning and welcome everyone to our fifth session of the Cybersecurity Executive Program, in which today we will be touching a critical theme for everyone, which is ransomware. I'm delighted to announce that we have Alonso Yanez and Chris Vincent, two authorities in this field that will enlighten us today with more information that I'm sure it will help us be safer and more aware at the end of the conversation. So thank you everyone for joining us. And with this, I pass the word to my dear colleague and friend, Mauricio Benavides. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. And just to reemphasize that, thank you, HSBC and Carlos, for helping us put this together, and MetaBase for making this happen. I think awareness is one of the critical things across Latin America, and it's super important for companies to pay more attention and to start dealing with the most active threats that we're seeing within the region. So as Carlos was mentioning, we have two sides and two views that I think the conversation is going to be amazing. One is from Alonso. Alonso has been working in multiple companies, global companies. He started his career in consulting, then moved into Pepsi, then moved into Walmart, where he's actually the CIO today. Lots of experience. He gets to deal with a lot of these type of attacks and things through the e-commerce platform, the digital platform. He's an expert on digital transformation and so on. So it'll be very interesting to hear from his end some of the things that he's seen on the ransomware aspect. And then Chris has been within the industry, many years. He started also in consulting services, moved on into some of the largest cybersecurity companies and have been dealing with ransomware for many years. And now he's one of the few, or I would say the only company that's just focused on ransomware that is helping avoid that from every perspective. So I think we're going to have a really interesting setting, and we're looking forward to it. So Chris, maybe we can start off with just giving a high overview as what you believe or think ransomware is. So because we all hear ransomware is a big thing. We hear the news saying ransomware is the biggest thing. We're all getting hit by ransomware, but a lot of the times I think it's not 100% for people that are not in the industry to know what ransomware is. So maybe we can start with that.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mao, and I appreciate you for it, and thank you for allowing us to be here. So from a ransomware perspective, what is it? Ransomware is a type of malware, right? Ransomware is also something unique. It has its own business model. So when you describe it, you really describe two separate things. You describe the business model of ransomware, which is why it's so hyper successful, and then you describe the threat itself, which is the weapon that does all the damage, right? The thing that opens up, encrypts, deletes your files, right? If you look at the campaign behind ransomware, it doesn't actually include the threat ransomware at all. It's about initial access. We'll talk about the business model likely here in a little bit, but as I broker initial access, a lot of it has to do with blending threats from across that malware profile, right? How do I gain initial access, gain a foothold into the environment, not do anything malicious, but sit there and survey, recon. They have long dwell times. They live off the land in these client environments where they don't do anything malicious. They look like a regular process run. If you look at attribution to ransomware, it looks like backup and recovery software, you and I, operating on the machine. So from a ransomware perspective, the unique thing is it's built like a commercial application. It looks like a commercial application running on a machine until it does something bad. And when it does something bad, that's typically when you have minutes to react to it, right? And that's the weapon stage. So when you think ransomware, really think a couple of different things. Think campaign, think weapon, and then think the overarching business model of ransomware that we'll talk about in the different components. I hope that answers it now.
Sorry, yeah, no, I think it gives a pretty global view, and I think Alonso, would be nice to hear from your perspective some of the things that you're seeing within the market and around ransomware.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I'm very glad to be here and have this discussion with you on this critical subject, and becoming even more critical as we move into the digital world. And let me explain what is going on from a perspective of a client like Walmart in Mexico. We are a large company, 230,000 people, employees or associates. And we operate in Mexico and Central America in 3,500 stores, 80 distribution centers, and we have literally hundreds of thousands of devices connected. So as we move into the digital world, in our digital journey, everything gets connected. And in the hyperconnectivity world, also the possibilities of an attack, vulnerabilities grow exponentially. So from our perspective, ransomware, being one of many different threats that we deal with on a daily basis, require preparation, require prevention, but also require strict protocols to react and to recover if something happens. So basically, we see this as non-exclusively a technical challenge. I mean, the technical side of the challenge is clear, it's obvious, but the human factor is also very important. Because if you consider companies like yours or Walmart or many others in the world, where literally hundreds of thousands of people and devices and things are connected and open to the world, well, we need to take care of that, and we need to manage this phenomenon and finding the right balance against protection, against flexibility. And this is our day-to-day challenge, at least in Walmart. If we want to move fast, how open should we be? But at the same time, what are we going to do to protect ourselves and be ready in case that something happens? Because believe me, something is going to happen to all of us.
Oh, thank you so much for that insight. And Chris, are you seeing the same trends globally? Is it more by region? What are you seeing, and what are some of the examples of? Because we see that attacks are getting more sophisticated every time, and as Alonso's saying, is we need to be ready on how to execute when we get an attack or a ransom. What are some of the things that you've seen by regions, or some of the latest things that you could tell someone? Hey, be careful, because this is the way things are. This is the start. This is what we're seeing, how it's able, becoming bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it's unique, right? Ransomware has evolved over the last decade from being this commodity volumetric attack, where it was it'll lock up personal computers, and hey, I'm going to ransom the personal computer for $100, and they tried to make their money that way, and then they got in to this foray of the enterprise, right? Hey, we don't have to steal an executive and hold them hostage at gunpoint anymore. We can just steal the data, hold that hostage, and obfuscate ourselves behind this electronic wall, right? And the unique thing that we've seen over the last 3 years or so is that ransomware has been a cover, in many cases, for a lot of nation state advanced threat actors. They use ransomware as a cover in order to carry out a campaign, right? That campaign is to collect information. That campaign is to steal information. That campaign, in some cases, is to extort money. And then finally, in some cases, that campaign is to do destruction, right? How do I disable and disrupt business operations? If you look at what's been happening recently, not only are the level of sophistications going up, but the attacks themselves have evolved, right? If you look at the business model of ransomware, the reason it's more than a threat is because a common ransomware group called Conti this year had a leak, and they broke up. One of their affiliates leaked some of their information. And as a cybersecurity community, we applauded it. We said, this is the downfall of ransomware groups because they were the most prolific. But Conti did something that was unique. with any person or group that has some unique information about how they've been hyper successful, they created a consulting organization. And now they consult ransomware groups across the globe. And they help give them scale. They help legitimize their operation. They help them organize. These companies look like regular companies, like Yours and I's, right? They have HR departments. They have back office operations. They have affiliate and distribution networks. They have initial access brokers. They have developers that are very highly skilled and highly talented. They have QA teams that do regression testing of the same tools you put in your security stack. So when you look at the sophistication of the attacker today, it's very, very unique. And you're starting to see them blend different attack paths. One is ransomware. The most leverage I can impose on a company is to seize its operation, right? Stop business from occurring, because at that point, they're more amenable to pay my demand. Secondarily, if you don't do that, I'm going to extort your information. With the information I exfilled, I'm going to go ahead and tell the world I'm going to expose it to them. Third, they'll say, if you don't pay my ransom demand, I'm going to DDoS your network or cloud it with traffic so that your business operation halts again. And then finally, if you don't do that, I'm going to go to your consumer that consumes your products or services and say, I have your information. You as this company will not pay my demand, so now I'm going to extort you. So when you see it, this model has become very, very sophisticated, not just from a technical sophistication, but from a business model sophistication and how they extort and lever themselves. So when you look at this, it's grown beyond what was a commodity threat into an entire category, which my opinion solely will become kind of the business model of malware moving forward. So just a little bit about what we see on a day-to-day, Mauricio.
Okay. Oh, it's super interesting. And I think one of the questions that we're always asked, Alonso, is like, what should a company do or how should you start talking to your team inside to say, how can we at least be more proactive versus reactive? And what type of things are you guys doing to protect yourselves from you and the customers and your vendors from this? Like, what are some of the things that you start recommending people or talking about? No,
that's a good question, Mauricio, because I believe that it all starts with awareness. So we need to understand the phenomenon, as Chris is describing. It's complex, it's evolving rapidly, and we always have this false idea of security, or that we are safe, no? For different reasons. And that's very dangerous, because if we assume that we are strong, that we have all the technology to protect us, that we have everything necessary to prevent a bad thing from happening, I believe it's a mistake. So in first place, what we do, for instance, is to raise awareness. And the challenge that we have in Walmart is how to transform the 230,000 people into the first line of defense. Because yes, we do have technology to cover the information assets and to protect our information and technology. But the real challenge is how to convince anyone, or how to educate anyone in a company with backgrounds not technical, that it's important to protect yourself. And it all starts maybe in your home, in my home, in the different conversations that we have with our families, with our friends, and then in our working environments. It is very important to raise this awareness. So we study the phenomenon. We create these education materials and initiatives to help the organization to understand a very complex phenomenon. No, that's the first step. In second place, it is important to invest in the prevention, but it's also important to invest in your capacities for reaction and recovery. So assuming that you want to plan for the worst and hope for the best, then the real question is, what are you going to do when you got a successful ransom attack? Because if you analyze the situation from that perspective, you may find interesting things. Like, for instance, you may say that you feel safe and good because you have a backup. All your information is backed up, and that's okay. But what if your critical information takes 2 weeks to be recovered from a backup? When you handle large volumes of information like banks or retail businesses or others, it is important to take into consideration what is going to happen when you want to recover yourself from an attack. So putting in perspective this, so it's like planning for war, getting ready with your army of people, the human factor, and supported by technology. And I want to briefly mention the technology side of it, because years ago, it was enough to have an antivirus or preventive measures to forbid access to your networks. Now, with the hundreds of thousands of different ways in which you interact with other ecosystems, then it is impossible to protect yourself manually or based on human workforce. So you need automatic tools, you need automatic approaches to get really protected, and that your protection evolves at the same pace of the threats out there. You're on mute.
Mauricio, you're on mute.
Well, thank you. I was going to say, if you had anything to add, because I love Alonso's point in how it is an army, right? How do you need to make sure that we're always protecting yourself, because there's an attacker coming in different ways and different views. And maybe you can complement that, talk a little bit about how groups are organized and how does that army needs to start thinking of being protecting and what to do, no? So maybe you can complement a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, Alonso is spot on. I mean, if you take a look at how clients have evolved in protecting their organizations today versus 10 years ago, it's kind of this layered approach. The human element or the human faction is on the outer rim, and you have to arm the troops, tell them what the mission is, help them understand the different scenarios that they're going to be under in a day-to-day. The highly sophisticated scenarios where you may get an email from an actual employee of, in Alonso's case, Walmart, and how to validate that is indeed the case, right? That is true. You are getting a legitimate email, and it is not a fake or a phished email. Secondarily, when it comes to this security infrastructure, it's tough, because as a cybersecurity industry, we do such a great job of innovation, but we do such a poor job of talking about kind of the facts, right? A lot of times there's some misinformation out there about how to do these things. And there's more tools per capita than there have ever been. Yet there's more attacks and more successful attacks. And the cost of those attacks is higher than it's ever been as well. So it's this cat and mouse game, right? And then finally, to Alonso's point of, your disaster recovery, your business continuity planning, right? How do you ensure that if your operation goes down or suffers an outage, you can get it up as quickly as humanly possible? If we take a look at the techniques that are being deployed today by these operators, those techniques target a few things. They target humans first and foremost. So the better job you do on the front line, the better you're protected. You narrow the threat surface by which they can enter through, right? Secondarily, we have seen that a lot of the cybersecurity industry, the control industry, is about a decade old at this point. And the challenge that you'll see with some of these sophisticated threats is they actually have architectural bypasses. I'll give you some examples. I could go to the dark web, buy credentials, legitimate credentials, and then I could buy RDP or remote access into an environment today for probably less than $100. And if I can do that, I circumvent a big part of that network security stack that's been put in place. That's where humans become another critical factor. And then once I'm there, I have bypasses I can deploy for the endpoint environments that I can bypass them and get beyond them architecturally. Something called user land unhooking is a common one, right? That's where humans come into play again. And the orientation of how they're looking at the environment, seeing anomalies, right? And then finally, from a disaster recovery standpoint, one of the first campaigns that a ransomware operator will run is to try to shut down or corrupt your backup or your virtual shadow copies so that you don't have a reliable backup to go back to. If you look at this, humans are on the front line of each one of those controls, right? So if you do a good job there, you're really helping yourself. From a control perspective, there are layers that you can put into place to armor your defenses. And then finally, from a recovery standpoint, to Alonso's point, if it takes you 2 weeks to recover, how much money does that business lose during that time? Businesses only have a certain runway. So how can we make sure that we plan and test to recover as quickly as humanly possible? We see those evasive techniques being deployed in today's threats. And at the end of the day, it takes a lot of sophistication and or partnership, collaboration between one another, internal and external to the organization, to be able to kind of thwart off these threats. So that would be, from my view, just taking a look at it from the outside of what do multiple customers do, and what are we seeing some of the tactics and tricks that these operators are employing.
Okay, I don't know, Alonso, if you want to complement anything on this point, or
I just wanted to add the dimension of the challenge here. For instance, in case of Walmart, we have close to 14 billion blocked attacks every year, 2 billion of spam emails, and 230 billion of malware alerts. So the threat is not minor. I know we are a large company, but it will be interesting to find out for mid-sized businesses, even for small businesses, the hunger for an attack that external parties may have on you. So that's not comforting, and that's important, because we need to take into consideration that the defense and the prevention requires, again, preparation. That would be my additional comment, Mauricio.
no, I think it's great, and remember, everybody that's hearing, if you have any questions, start posting them on the chat, so that way we can address them. But you mentioned also something interesting, both of you. You know, at the end of the day, any person could be a target to these things, because through one person you can go pretty much into any company, including Walmart. No, so we have some CEOs, some CFOs, people from the financial side, C-class executives that are listening to the conversation. And I think this question is to you, Alonso. Like, what are the things that you're bringing up to your board, to the executive team, as to, if you're a CFO and you want to understand how good your team is performing, or what are the things you need to start putting attention to see if you're in the right place from a ransomware perspective, what are the things you recommend for a CFO, CEO, COO to start thinking about? No, because not everybody is as sophisticated on the cyberspace, and that's why these conversations are very meaningful. But what would be the things that you recommend somebody at the C level to be thinking of, or to be asking? And then we can go to you, Chris, to complement.
And well, it's interesting, and also it's related to the awareness part of my previous comment. One of the challenges that we have internally is again, how to educate in a positive way, how to educate non-technical people on highly sophisticated technical things. So one of the initiatives that we have on awareness has to be with explaining the stories behind some of the successful attacks that you read in the news, and we all have examples like that, and unfortunately those examples are very, very common lately. No, so understanding what is going on in the world, it is also very important to bring the experts on board. So don't leave your internal resources alone trying to explain this, not because they are not proficient enough, they are not good enough. No, because what you need is it's a panoramic view on what is going on in the market. And there are some companies specialized on this that can bring you some examples and best practices. And the other one is to translate the effects of this type of attacks or the consequence of this successful attack into a business language. So Chris, you mentioned what is going on in your business in a week of work. So could you shut down your business for a week or two? What are the implications from the economic perspective, financial perspective, from reputational perspective? If you analyze the situation like that, so you will create a lot of anxiety in the board. But at the same time, if you have the right first questions answered, so you're in a good position to continue with an awareness initiative or campaign going forward.
Yeah, I mean, in general, Alonso hit it right on the button. The challenge with the threat of ransomware is it's such a polarizing topic, right? It seems like every day you see a new company or a multitude of companies that are getting hit by this threat. If you look at it, it can almost seem defeating. You know, and when you explain that to the board or the executive team, the challenge that you have is how do you communicate factually with them the nature of the threat, in some cases the dire nature of the threat, and the consequences and outcomes that will come from a successful threat, with kind of the realities of the market. If you look at the baseline statistics, it looks like 37% of all companies globally will suffer a significant ransomware attack in the year 2022, this year. 37%, so a third of all companies will suffer at least one attack. When I say significant, I mean a lockup of 20% or more of your fleet. If you were to lock up 20% of your employees from being able to do work, 20% of your servers from being able to serve up information to your consumers, 20% of your entire business essentially is shut off. What does that mean? And what we've been taking a look at is how do we equate that risk language into financial language? What does that mean to your company? And based on that, what steps can you take to minimize that, right? In many cases, I'll pull out an analogy. You don't have to be faster than the bear. You have to be faster than the next guy, right? And, you know, if you look at the Walmarts of the world and the program that Alonso is running, it's hyper sophisticated. He has the resources, the people, the time to be able to build one of the most incredible programs in the world. That also being said, he has to do that because he is going to be such a heavy target, because the world will bear down on him knowing the damage or the extortion that they could essentially have on a Walmart, right? The other challenge is when it comes to small businesses, it's equating it from the standpoint of risk to financial terms, and then how much runway do you have in the bank? 30% of small businesses that are hit will go out of business when they're hit by a ransomware attack or have to claim some form of bankruptcy. That's a stark reality. We haven't seen that necessarily with other threats of malware. So when it comes down to it, I agree with Alonso wholeheartedly, 100%. It's really taking the technical language that we live in every day, equating it to the financial language that a fiduciary is going to understand, and being able to marry those two so you're speaking the same language as them. So to complement what Alonso said, it's I'm in violent agreement with that.
Nice. No, super interesting. And I think, you know, it's crazy, but every year attacks of ransomware keep going up in a huge percentage. And this is not going to stop anytime soon. It's just getting more complicated, no? Well, starting to address some of the questions that people are asking. The first one is, how can we detect ransomware attacks quickly if we are a startup company? Anybody wants to take that one? Maybe you, Chris.
Yeah, if you're a startup company, the ability to detect ransomware attacks really comes into a couple core principles, and Alonso really hit them, right? One is good security awareness training for your employees. If you're going to make one investment, I would invest there, because when you're a small company, you can control that narrative pretty tightly. When you get to be a bigger company, it gets to be a bigger challenge because there's more holes that can be opened up. So security awareness training would be, first and foremost. Secondarily, I would take a look at critical security controls that you could deploy. Things like a SASE gateway. If people don't know what that is, please ping us on the back end, and between Mauricio, myself, and Alonso, we can give you some suggestions, right? Secondarily, having a good endpoint protection platform. So an EDR or an XDR platform that can help you. And then there are also some other unique solutions out there that help specifically against this type of threat. I work for one of the companies. This isn't commercial, so I'm not going to go down that route. But people that specialize in this particular area to be able to cordon that off. Also, if you're a small company, it might be wise to think about some level of service, a managed detection and response service that you can employ that can help you monitor your environment. And they have scale, they have sophistication, and you don't have to hire a mountain of team in order to get that to take place. So those would be some of my suggestions in general, and have a very good disaster recovery plan with a good backup and recovery software, of which we would love to make suggestions to you guys, after the fact, if that's so warranted. Alonso, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
And I totally agree, Chris. I would only add that for those of you with a startup at hand, I would suggest to consider in your plans, in your development plans, a cybersecurity track. So typically, you will have in your business plan the financials, the operations, the procurement or development, depending on on the type of your business. But you must add a track for cybersecurity, because you have a golden opportunity to build things the right way. So considering that you will need an evolving cybersecurity infrastructure, flexible, adaptable to the future. If you have a traditional business, it's hard to implement. Sometimes it's painful for some of us to implement things like that. For those of you starting a business, you have a golden opportunity. And depending on the type of your business, and as Chris, you mentioned, a service. So hire security as a service, outsource your security function, could be an interesting alternative, cost effective.
No, and I echo both of you. I mean, being a startup 5 years ago, I never thought as a serial entrepreneur building something with security embedded into it. I think today it's a culture that when you first come up with an idea, it's not only the UI or how do you like build an easy product for consumers and solving just one thing, but it's just part of the culture that you need to grow with, because every time the world is getting more connected to the internet, it's becoming more sophisticated. The AI piece is getting there. So this is never going to stop. It's just getting more complicated. So I think, as you're saying, Alonso, and you were echoing, Chris, is you need to make sure that you start with that mindset, even if it's just the base, to think about security as one of your big pillars, no? Because it's coming. And I think I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, because one is talking about a mid-sized company saying, like, is the framework of education, awareness, endpoint security, endpoint detection and response recovery business plan the right place to start? And I would say it's rare to see somebody already thinking about all these different things in a mid-sized company. So I think you're in the right track. but that combined with how do companies like Walmart or large entities, decide where to start? How do you select your, approach, your roadmap, how's your decision criteria? Because I think the combination of these two things could help and just help people have that framework. So I don't know, Alonso, how do you guys have that criteria that could help other companies, mid-size, small, or large, just think about, how do we process that?
Yeah, in our case, Mauricio, colleagues, in our case, it's been a journey. So we are a 60-year-old company, and before the intensive use of technology, we had risk management. So we analyzed and we planned for different risks. Environmental risk, commercial risks, financial risk, procurement. So we have that, and that's a strong practice that we have implemented since the beginning of the company. Now we have added the technology perspective to that risk management approach. And within the technology perspective, where we track 34 different risks, we have 4 of them related to information security. And that's where we started years ago to develop an approach to find the right way to approach a situation like this, a risk like this, as we do with any other type of risks. So my advice for you is to leverage your risk management approach or your risk management intention or plans, and add the information technology or the cybersecurity component to it. Once you do that, it is relatively easy to find templates or ideas out there in the market, either via your own research. There are lots of resources available for you, or again, seeking advice for specialized companies and professionals that can help you to expedite your journey. But at the end, it's not very different from other types of risk that we manage on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, to add to Alonso's comments, if you look at it, finding a good framework to cybersecurity and risk management and mitigation is key. The other thing that we see quite a bit is just kind of testing the efficacy of where you are. If you're at the beginning of your journey, maybe you take a look at doing some testing of the infrastructure to see where are my biggest holes. And then from there, you might take a look at being able to create a roadmap that you can prioritize based on risk, right? We see the testing component has increased tenfold over the last few years because many have a program. They've built a fabric. They have their policies, their processes, their playbooks built out. And if not, it's a great place to start. But then it comes down to testing it, right? Just because you have a control to fill a gap does not mean that control's efficacy over time will be the same and static. So you have to ensure that you stay on top of it. You evolve your program over time, and you can help minimize not just the technology risks, but really what we've taken a look at is technology risks equate to the biggest business risks that are out there. So as we go down that path, the two things that I would just add in there is find a good framework. You have MITRE, you have NIST, you have a multitude of others. A map to that framework, and then ensure that you do regular testing, no matter where you are in your journey, so that you can make the right choices without making very expensive mistakes that cost you more money in the long haul. And there's a phenomenal resources and assets out there that everybody can leverage that you don't have to pay a dime for, right? So when it comes down to it, those would be the two things that I would add to Alonso's statement.
Nice. And then, Chris, as I'm reading another question is, how can we know if we stopped a malicious operation or just an activity? And can we detect ransomware attacks beyond the endpoint?
Yeah, it's a good question. Really good question. How can you be sure? I'm going to say something that is unpopular, but I found it to be true. You can't be sure. The reason you can't be sure is because threat actors employ some unique techniques. I'll give you an example. We've talked to many customers that have said, hey, we have contained ransomware infections at 5, 50, 100 machines. We were able to quarantine quickly. We were able to knock the infection out and beat it. We tell a lot of those customers, make sure that you monitor your environment even more so now than ever. And they ask me why. And I tell them, because ransomware operators, their affiliate networks actually run attacks, pilot attacks, to see how you respond, what you respond with, how quickly you respond. And they build that into their persistence model so that even if they're caught, they can survive, right? And then what do? Then they take the pilot attack with a ransomware variant they know will get caught. And now they deploy the real weapon, but they might wait months, years in some cases, to deploy that for maximum leverage. They kind of lull you back to sleep with the inactivity. So you can't be 100% certain, but you can do some things to ensure that you are more certain than not. A lot of the controls we just talked about will not make you a completely desirable target because it just costs more money to infiltrate you, right? If you start taking a look at that, there are some items that you can do or that you can take on in terms of taking a look at and inoculating your fleet and how that can lend to protection, not just fleet-wide, but also protection of that human element that could fail, right? There are solutions out there that can do that for you. Mao, I'm forgetting the second part of the question. What am I missing here?
The other piece was like, and can we detect ransomware attacks beyond the endpoint?
So the answer is yes, you can. You can detect ransomware attacks in the network because a large movement in ransomware operations has been data exfil operations, right? So if you don't have a fully robust data loss prevention program, there are things that you can do to detect data exfiltration at a network layer. That will help you say, hey, this is one of the initial stages or latter stages of this attack before they deploy that weapon and lock my systems. That way you can see what processes are doing that, what commands are calling that outside of your network and shut access down to them. A good example is if it's a known bad C2 server or the server that they are exfilling data to, and they haven't obfuscated it through an AWS or a Google Cloud or an Azure, right? You can shut that C2 down and ensure that they can never steal that exfil data ever again. You also have a myriad of network tools that provide this. A lot of your firewall technologies or secure web gateways or SASE gateways, they do it today as well. So you can detect it beyond the endpoint. The endpoint is the most capable control by which you can actually detect the ransomware threat itself and the campaign. Whereas the network, you're probably going to catch more of the campaign because by the time ransomware executes, it's too late to detect at that point. So just my intel in general, Alonso, would love to hear your thoughts.
And I guess that the human, I was thinking about human factor again, Chris, and I was reading also the different questions in the chat, and I believe that again, as we move to hyper connectivity, no, it's more complicated because everything is connected, because that's the way in which the business will operate in the future. So it is impossible to tackle each one of those entry points, no, manually. So you need the different tools and technologies and approaches implemented to handle that. If I may to use the analogy, imagine that in your home you have more windows and doors, and you buy a lock for each one of them, but you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And in many cases, some of the windows you may have leads to nothing, to an empty room. So is there a need to put a lock on that window? Not really. So maybe different approaches in the future will be necessary based on the risk, your appetite for risk. At the end, what it's important is that to consider that it's impossible to cover everything, and it's not necessary in my mind. So if you cover the 20% of your most critical assets, and you put all the efforts, approaches, tools, and things behind your protection, that will be an interesting approach. But on the other hand, it's scary to know that you have an open door without lock. But maybe that's okay if you have that situation contained.
I think it's a great analogy, because at the end of the day, that's how we live on a daily basis. And every time we're more connected to the internet. So it's just the same replica, no? But it's interesting analogy, and it's really good, because then it gives you a really good perspective. I think another one here is, what are the main causes of successful ransomware? And maybe, I know, Chris, you guys did some stuff close to like what happened in Costa Rica and some of the other governments. Maybe it'll be interesting to get a sense, like on the cycle of, like, it's like, what are the main causes, what happens in between, and then what goes after.
Yeah, so it's unique. We've seen the main causes kind of shift around a little bit. Phishing remains one of the big ones, right? And that speaks to the human element that we're talking about. If you have good trained employees, it is much harder to phish them. We also see things like there is a faction, one of 3 groups within ransomware operations. You have the vendor that creates the packages. You have the partners and affiliates that distribute the packages. So think of those as a service provider. And then you have initial access brokers that they broker access into these companies, right? From an initial access broker perspective, what we've actually seen over time is due to the breaches that you've seen of security tools that are out there, different software packages that are out there. You don't initially see any true churn from that, because what happens is those initial access brokers, they garner all of that access and then they sell it, right? And they sell it to people that will pay money to target a particular company. If you look at in the example of Costa Rica, right? Or some of the other large governments that have been compromised. A lot of it started with human error, right? And that human error proliferated into access into the environment. That access into the environment led to lateralization, meaning that they took one machine, one user that they're surviving on, not doing anything malicious, and they continue to harvest credentials and spread out, right? And they do it over a long period of time. And then once they have kind of what they call a lever point, hey, if I have 20, 30, 50, 60% of this organization compromised, now I can deploy my weapon. That's the only time you really see them do anything malicious, right? Outside of that, it legitimately looks like an application running on your system, just idly running. You don't know what it's doing. It's not bogging your system down. You just know, oh, it's one of a bunch of applications on here that I don't know what 99% of them do, right? So it's very, very tough to disseminate it. So when you look at it, a lot of attacks are human error or initial access that's already been harvested and sold. And you're starting to see that initial access component is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, because a lot of these breaches that you see, what they're looking to do is harvest information and credentials so that they don't have to work so hard to socially engineer humans, right? Because if I can buy it for $100, it costs me far less money than the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars to social engineer a specific target. So we see it a lot of times it has started with the human element, but today we're seeing a lot of that initial access being brokered automatically. And we'll see that those initial access networks, the botnets that are out there, they'll continue to harvest that and sell those compromises to the market. So it's a much deeper topic that we could probably wax poetic on for hours. Because there's so many different facets, but I'll leave it at that just for the sake of time.
I don't know if you want to add anything, Alonso, or
We have seen both. I mean, the human error and human factor, and also those open doors and windows that we all have. We internally have a very skilled group of hackers with the mission to vulnerate ourselves and find those holes and find those vulnerabilities internally. And we have found both human errors and we have found technical vulnerabilities, and that's where we started remediation.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I think as you both mentioned, I mean, I see a couple of questions, but we're almost running out of time around, what type of technologies, whether we should be buying tools from different places in the world, conflicting ones. But I think you both mentioned about, you need to think about what technologies you have in place, what processes you have in place, and what type of people are trained. So that way you can look around and see what's most necessarily, I think you both mentioned it's always good to have an external view and a third party an expert on the topic helping you assess that. But without having to go into one or the other direction in terms of tools, but there's not a lot of things around focus on ransomware right now, but it's a combination of things. It's the training, it's, the phishing attacks. We were having one of the panelists was saying super sophisticated person, founder of a couple companies, very big companies, and he clicked on an email, right? And it's like, okay, but how did you do it? So it's going to happen to all of us, I think. And at the end of the day, it's like, what do you do in case you do something like that? And how can you avoid it? And you guys both talk a little bit about it. I think because of time, if you guys have a last couple of minutes of conclusions, we could start with you, Alonso, and see if you have any thoughts for the audience. And obviously, if people have questions after, we can get back to them in any case. But any last thoughts that you might have on your end, Alonso?
I just have one final recommendation, Mauricio and colleagues. When we face a sophisticated threat that is hard to understand, highly technical, best course of action is to seek for advice and seek for information. As Chris mentioned, there are tons of information for free all over the place, but you also may want to look at those persons and companies specialized on this and seek for advice. That pays off.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, I would, to Alonso's point, collaboration is key. In cybersecurity, a lot of times you get people that they don't want to share, because they don't want to tip their hand, if you will. I think the good part about the world is, while we have a sophisticated adversary, we just outnumber them 100 to 1. And if we're able to collaborate, share that information, share new techniques, tips, tools, general information, we will be far better off than if we go at it alone. I know just in a short time, having worked with people like Alonso and Mauricio, just the knowledge that they have of a long career spent trying to defend companies against cyber criminals. And that was the one thing that I would say, if I'm going to leave someone with parting thoughts, would be reach out and seek advice, collaborate with people, share information, and you would be amazed at the things that incrementally you just may not have thought about that can be solved in a conversation. Outside of that, there are many specialty companies and humans that can help you in that next step of the journey, in try to create more sophisticated infrastructure and playbooks and processes and programs. But before you get there, make sure you do the basics. And collaboration and communication is probably the most basic thing that you can do every day. And I will leave it there, Mauricio.
Thank you so much, Chris. I think Alonso, Chris, this is a super helpful, session. I think the insights are great because it's things that we're all living on a daily basis, and it's crazy, but there's a lot of people from very large companies listening to this, and every type of idea, comment, or thought around this specific topic is pretty big, no? And a lot of the times, having a better understanding of what it is makes a big difference, no? Because you could be a hospital, or you could be a retail store, or you could be a financial company, and everybody is very exposed to a ransomware attack in any way, and that can shut off your operation at any point in time. And it just reminds you on how you need to continue training people, making sure your processes are correct, and that you have the right technologies in place, no? So thank you so much for the session, for your time, for sharing your thoughts and your experience with the audience. And I pass it on to Carlos to give the final talk and talk about next Friday session.
Thank you, Mauricio. I adhere to the thanks to Chris and Alonso today. It's incredible the knowledge that they have shared, best practices from obviously some of the largest companies here in the region and globally. So I hope everybody got this valuable insight, which is the key point for all of us to be better aware, better informed, to be better protected. And very connected with this topic, we're going to be talking next Friday around the cybersecurity in the industrial sector, which is linked to these type of interruptions and disruptions and how to avoid and be better prepared, for which we will have the participation of Yori Van Antwerp, the founder and CEO of SynCyber, and Salvador Mendoza, who is the head of research and development of MetaBaseQ, continuing with this very valuable sharing of information. So thank you again, Alonso and Chris and Mauricio, for the session today, and look forward to see you next Friday in our 6th session of this fantastic program. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Good
Thank
luck
you.
and stay safe.
Bye-bye.